I needed the money. That's what I kept telling myself as I pulled into the employee lot for Solstice Shores Water Park. The online job listing had promised competitive pay and all the sun you could handle. A perfect summer gig, I thought. A few months of telling kids they're too short for the big slides, getting a tan and eating discounted Dippin' Dots. That was the plan anyway. The interview process should have been my first warning. Most seasonal jobs just needed a pulse and a smile, but Mr. Abernathy, the park manager, had specific questions. Strange questions. "How do you handle following instructions without understanding their purpose?" he asked, his pale eyes studying me from behind wire-rimmed glasses. I guess I just do what I'm told," I answered, confused. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Very good. And how do you feel about working nights? Late nights?" I shrugged. "Money's money." "Indeed it is." He leaned back in his chair, and I noticed something odd. The office had no windows, despite being on the second floor. The walls were covered in framed photos of the park through the decades, but in every single picture, the guests looked wrong. Their faces were too pale, their smiles too wide, their eyes reflecting the camera flash like animals caught in headlights. "The last," Cron went on. "Final question," Abernathy said. "Do you believe in giving things their due?" I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Respect. Acknowledgement. Some places, some things, they require tribute. A small price for peaceful coexistence." His fingers drummed on the desk. "Would you pay such a price?" I was desperate for the job. "Sure, I guess." His smile widened. "Excellent. Welcome to Solstice Shores. Your first day is Monday. Come early. There are orientations beyond the standard training." As I left, I glanced back at the building. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw faces pressed against the windows of the windowless office, watching me go. The employee handbook arrived in my mailbox 3 days later. It was thick, unusually thick for a seasonal job. Most of it was standard stuff. Mission statements, safety protocols, how to lift with your legs. But tucked in the back, printed on a different kind of paper, thinner and almost brittle, was a chapter titled Park Harmony and Operational Continuity. The paper felt old, much older than the rest of the handbook. The text was typed on what looked like an old typewriter, with letters that were slightly uneven and faded. Some of the rules were normal enough. Rule 1. Always maintain a positive attitude. The guests can sense negativity, and they don't like it. Rule 2. The Abyss slide closes at 6:45 p.m. sharp, 15 minutes before the rest of the park, no exceptions. But others were different. Rule 8. If you encounter a guest who appears pale and translucent, especially around the eyes, treat them normally but avoid direct eye contact. They are not hostile, but they are not entirely guests either. Rule 11. If a lifeguard's whistle goes silent but they keep scanning the water, alert another guard. Do not approach them directly. Rule 15. The maintenance tunnels under the park are off limits to all staff except certified night crews. If you hear scratching or voices from drain grates, report it immediately, but do not investigate. The most unsettling was Rule 23. Rule 23. Every employee must make a monthly offering at the Grotto of Whispers. This is not optional. The offering must be personal, something that holds meaning or value to you. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination, among other consequences. Read through all 37 rules twice. Some mentioned things that didn't make sense: the deep reservoir, the old tenants, the containment protocols. Others were so specific they seemed to reference incidents that had already happened. That night, I had the first dream. I was standing in the empty park at midnight. The pools were black mirrors, reflecting a starless sky. Something was moving beneath the surface of the wave pool. Something massive and pale. And from the speakers, instead of cheerful pop music, came a sound like children crying, but underwater, muffled and distorted. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. Outside my window I could hear the distant sound of rushing water, even though I lived miles from the nearest river. My first day was a blur of training rooms and CPR dummies. The official rules were drilled into us. No running. Enforce height restrictions. Hydration is mandatory. The park's motto was even, "Safety makes the splash." It all made sense. My trainer was a man named Dale. He had the kind of deep-set exhaustion you get from staring into a sunlit wave pool for 1,000 summers. While the other trainers were upbeat, Dale was grim. His skin was weathered and pale, and his eyes held a haunted quality that made me think he'd seen things the training videos didn't cover. "Forget most of that," he told me and 2 other new hires, Chloe and Sam. We were standing at the base of Neptune's Plunge, the park's oldest slide. "The real job is about watching, listening, and following the other rules." Chloe laughed. She was young, maybe 19, with the kind of bright energy that made her seem invincible. "You mean like, don't eat too many hot dogs before your shift?" Dale didn't smile. His gaze drifted to a small maintenance shed nearly hidden by hibiscus bushes. "No, I mean the rules that keep you alive." He pulled a laminated copy of the Harmony Rules from his pocket. The plastic was yellowed and cracked, like it had been carried for years. "Before your first shift, and on the first day of each month, leave a small token at the entrance to the Grotto of Whispers cave ride. A coin, a smooth stone, something personal. This is non-negotiable." Sam shifted uncomfortably. He was my age, maybe a year older, with a kind of nervous energy that made him constantly fidget. "What happens if we don't?" Dale's expression darkened. "Last summer, a kid named Trevor thought it was stupid, called it superstitious bullshit. He worked here for 3 weeks without making an offering." Dale paused, his eyes distant. "We found him in the morning, floating face down in the kiddie pool. Autopsy said he drowned, but the kiddie pool is only 18 inches deep. Trevor was 6'2" and a competitive swimmer." The air around us seemed to grow cold despite the Florida heat. "The coroner found something else," Dale continued. "His lungs were full of water, but not chlorinated water. It was brackish, swamp water, old water, the kind that's been sitting underground for decades." He looked at each of us. "Just do it. Don't ask questions. Your first shift is tomorrow at 8 a.m. Go to the grotto first." As we walked back to the main building, I noticed something I'd missed before. The park's landscaping was beautiful. Slush tropical plants, winding paths, carefully manicured gardens. But every plant was positioned to block clear sight lines. You couldn't see from one area to another without something green in the way. It was like the park was designed to hide things. "Did you notice the trees?" Sam whispered to me. I looked up. The palm trees were wrong. Their fronds drooped at odd angles, and their trunks were scarred with what looked like claw marks. Deep gouges that were too regular to be natural, too large to be from any animal I knew. "Probably just maintenance equipment," I said, but I didn't believe it. That evening, I drove home past the park. It was closed, but lights were on in the administrative building. As I slowed down, I saw movement in the employee parking lot. A figure in a park uniform was walking toward the main gate, but something was wrong with their gait. They moved too smoothly, almost gliding, and their head was tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. I hit the gas and didn't look back. The next morning, the park was silent. The rising sun cast long, distorted shadows that made the slides look like skeletons. I met Chloe and Sam at the entrance. Both looked like they'd slept about as well as I had. "Did you?" I asked. Sam held up a quarter. Seemed stupid to risk it, but his hand was shaking. Chloe rolled her eyes, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Fine, whatever. Let's get this cult initiation over with." The Grotto of Whispers was even less impressive in the daylight. The entrance was just a dark hole carved into what looked like concrete painted to resemble stone. The lazy river that wound through it was still and black, like oil. Near the "Do Not Enter" sign was a moss-covered rock with a small pile of trinkets, a few pennies, a plastic army man, a bottle cap, what looked like a class ring, and a small teddy bear that was missing one eye. "Jesus," Sam breathed. "How long has this been going on?" And held down for a closer look. Some of the offerings were recent. The bottle cap still had its label, the pennies were shiny, but others looked old, really old. The teddy bear's fur was matted and stained, and the missing eye socket looked like it had been torn out, not worn away. Sam tossed his quarter onto the pile. It landed with a soft clink. I hesitated, then placed a smooth gray stone I'd carried since childhood next to it. It was a worry stone my grandmother had given me, worn smooth by decades of nervous handling. Chloe sighed dramatically and pulled out a tube of cherry chapstick. "There," she said, throwing it onto the rock. "Can we go now? I feel like I'm in a bad horror movie." As we turned away, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A soft, slow exhale, like someone had been holding their breath and finally released it. But it came from inside the cave, from the dark water of the lazy river. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. They both shook their heads, but Sam's face had gone pale. "Probably just the pumps," Chloe said, but her voice was tight. I glanced back at the offering rock. My stomach dropped. The chapstick was gone. I'd seen it land right next to my stone. Now there was just Sam's quarter and my worry stone. But something else had appeared. A small white flower that definitely hadn't been there before. "Guys," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "the chapstick." "What about it?" Chloe asked, but when she looked back, her face went white. The flower was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. It was perfectly white, with petals that seemed to glow in the early morning light. But as I watched, one of the petals began to turn red at the edges, like it was absorbing something. "We need to go," Sam said, his voice cracking. "We need to go right now." As we hurried toward the main building, I heard the sound again, that soft exhale, but this time it sounded almost pleased. For the next few weeks, life at Solstice Shores was almost normal. I'd stand at the top of a slide tower, repeating the same phrases. "Arms and legs inside the slide. Wait for the green light. No, you can't take the inflatable unicorn." The work was mind-numbing, but the pay was good, and the other employees were friendly enough. But the other rules were always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Dale would quiz us randomly, like a teacher testing students on material that could save their lives. Lazy river flowing counterclockwise. "What do you do?" he'd ask during our lunch break. "Report it to the night manager on your way out," Sam would recite. "And don't talk about it to anyone else." "Why?" I asked one day. Dale's expression grew serious. "Because if it's flowing counterclockwise, it means something's fighting the current, something big. And if you talk about it, if you draw attention to it, it might decide to fight back." Chloe still thought it was elaborate hazing. "If you see a ghost, offer it a churro," she'd laugh. But I noticed she'd gotten quieter since the morning at the grotto. She'd catch herself staring at the water sometimes, like she was listening for something. My first real scare came during my third week. I was assigned to the Tsunami Tower, the park's newest attraction. It was a massive slide that dropped riders through a series of enclosed tubes before shooting them into a large splash pool. The twist was that the final drop was in complete darkness. Riders couldn't see where they were going. Around 2 p.m. I was getting ready to send down the next rider when I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was coming from inside the slide. A wet, slithering sound, like something large moving through the tubes. I held up my hand to stop the next guest and grabbed my radio. "This is Tower 7. I need a maintenance check on the Tsunami. There's something in the tubes." Dale's voice came back immediately. "Copy. Shut it down. Now." I hit the emergency stop and started clearing the line. The guests grumbled, but they moved. As the last person walked away, I heard it again, that slithering sound. but now it was accompanied by something else. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like claws on fiberglass. Dale arrived with a maintenance crew. They had equipment I'd never seen before. Long poles with hooks on the end, and what looked like a large net made of some kind of metallic material. "What's in there?" I asked. "Probably just debris," Dale said, but his eyes were worried. "Sometimes things get washed in from the old reservoir." They spent 20 minutes fishing around in the tubes. I couldn't see what they pulled out, but I heard Dale curse under his breath. When they finally emerged, they were carrying a large, heavy bag that dripped something dark onto the concrete. "Maintenance issue," Dale announced to the waiting crowd. "We'll have it fixed by tomorrow." But I noticed something they didn't say. The bag was moving. That night, I dreamed about the slide. I was rushing through the tubes in complete darkness, but I wasn't alone. Something was behind me, keeping pace, its claws scraping against the walls. And when I finally shot out into the splash pool, the water wasn't water at all. It was thick and black, and full of things that touched me with fingers that felt like seaweed. I woke up with the taste of swamp water in my mouth. It was Sam who got the first night shift. The park stayed open until 10 p.m. on weekends, but someone had to stay until midnight to run the cleaning cycles and check the equipment. The night shift paid double, and Sam needed the money. "It's just me and one other guy," he told us. "Dale says it's easy, just push some buttons and make sure nothing's broken." But when he came in the next morning, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His skin was pale, his hands shook when he tried to drink his coffee, and his eyes had a haunted quality that reminded me of Dale. "How was it?" Chloe asked. Sam stared at his coffee for a long moment. "Fine," he said finally. "Just fine." But he avoided eye contact, and I noticed his left hand was bandaged. "What happened to your hand?" I asked. "Cut it on some equipment," he said quickly. "No big deal." Dale appeared at our table. "Sam, a word?" I walked away, and I could see Dale talking intensely while Sam nodded. When they came back, Sam looked even worse. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," Sam said. "Just don't take a night shift, okay? Trust me on this." But it was too late. The next day, Abernathy called me into his office. "We need someone for Wednesday nights," he said. "Sam's requested to go back to days only. You're next on the list." I wanted to refuse, but I needed the money. "What exactly do I have to do?" "Simple. Run the cleaning cycles, check the chemical levels, make sure the pumps are working. Kevin from maintenance will show you the ropes." Abernathy's smile was the same unsettling expression from my interview. "It's very straightforward. Just follow the protocols." Wednesday night came too soon. Kevin was a thin, nervous man who looked like he'd been working nights for years. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were bloodshot. "The main thing is the cleaning cycles," he said, leading me to a control room I'd never seen before. It was underground, accessible only through a maintenance door near the wave pool. Each attraction has its own cycle. You just push the buttons in order. Red, yellow, green. Simple. The control room was filled with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the park. In the darkness, the empty pools looked like black holes. The slides were twisted shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "What about the special protocols?" I asked, remembering the handbook. Kev's expression grew serious. "The night rules are different. If you hear scratching from the tunnels, ignore it. If you see someone walking around the park, ignore them too. They're not supposed to be there, but they're not dangerous as long as you don't acknowledge them." "What do you mean, they're not supposed to be there?" "Old employees," Kevin said quietly. "People who didn't follow the rules. They're still here, in a way, still doing their jobs, but they're not really people anymore." He showed me the cleaning cycle schedule. Each attraction had to be cleaned in a specific order at specific times. The Grotto of Whispers was first, at 11 p.m. The Abyss was last, at 2 a.m. Why that order? I asked. It's about respect, Kevin said. The old things need to be acknowledged first. The dangerous things need to be dealt with last, when they're calmer. At 11 p.m., I started the first cycle. The Grotto of Whispers cleaning system was different from the others. Instead of just pumping fresh water through the lazy river, it drained the entire system and refilled it with what Kevin called consecrated water. Water that had been treated with salt and other things. As the old water drained out, I could see the bottom of the lazy river through the monitors. It was covered in a thick black sediment that seemed to move on its own. And in the deepest part, near the cave entrance, there was a hole. A perfectly round hole that the camera couldn't see the bottom of. The new water poured in, and the sediment dissolved. But just before the hole was covered, I saw something move inside it. Something pale and thin that quickly retreated deeper underground. Kevin, I called, but he was gone. I was alone in the control room, surrounded by monitors, showing an empty park that didn't feel empty at all. The next few hours passed slowly. I ran the cleaning cycles, checked the chemical levels, and tried not to look too closely at the monitors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At 1:30 a.m. I heard the scratching. It came from the air vents, a soft, rhythmic sound like claws on metal. I remembered Kevin's words and tried to ignore it, but it was getting louder and closer. The scratching stopped directly above my head. I looked up at the vent cover, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw an eye looking back at me. A pale, unblinking eye that reflected the light like a cat's. I grabbed the radio. Kevin? Kevin, are you there? Static. Then, faintly, Kevin's voice. Don't look up. Don't acknowledge it. Just do your job. The eye disappeared, but the scratching continued, moving through the vents toward the main building. I forced myself to focus on the monitors. It was almost time for the final cleaning cycle, the abyss. At 2 a.m. exactly, I started the abyss cycle. The system was different from the others. Instead of just cleaning the slide, it drained water from what the display called the deep reservoir, the underground water source that fed the entire park. As the old water was pumped out, I watched the monitors showing the slide's interior. The water level dropped, revealing the walls of the tube. They were covered in a thick, organic-looking substance that pulsed like it was alive, and carved into the walls were symbols, crude, primitive markings that hurt to look at. The new water began to flow, washing away the organic matter. But, as it did, something else came up from the deep reservoir, something that moved against the current, swimming upward through the pipes. I reached for the emergency stop, but the radio crackled to life. Don't stop the cycle. Kevin's voice was urgent. Let it finish. Whatever you see, let it finish. On the monitor, I watched the thing emerge into the slide. It was pale and elongated, with too many limbs that moved in ways that made my eyes water. It positioned itself at the top of the slide, coiled and waiting. The cycle finished. The abyss was clean, and something ancient and hungry was now inside it, waiting for tomorrow's riders. I ran the rest of the checks in a daze. When Kevin finally returned at 3 a.m., he looked at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. You saw it, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Most people quit after their first night shift, he said. The ones who don't, they become part of the system, like me. He smiled, and in the fluorescent light of the control room, I could see that his teeth were too sharp, and his eyes reflected light like an animal's. The choice is yours, he said, but remember, you signed the contracts. You made the offering. You're part of this place now, whether you like it or not. I stumbled out of the control room and into the pre-dawn darkness. The park was silent, but I could feel things watching me from the shadows. As I walked to my car, I saw movement in the employee parking lot. Figures in park uniforms walking purposefully toward the main building, their faces pale in the moonlight. I drove home in silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. and when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of pale things swimming through endless underground tunnels, waiting for the next cleaning cycle to bring them closer to the surface. My station for the 4th week was the abyss, the vertical drop slide that corkscrewed through black tunnels. The entrance was a dark hole that seemed to swallow light and sound. After my night shift experience, being assigned to the abyss felt like a punishment. The slide had its own specific rules. Rule 2, shut it down at 6:45 p.m. sharp, 15 minutes before the rest of the park. Rule 3, if the water in the abyss slide is anything other than clear, close the attraction immediately. Do not look down the tube. Avert your eyes and call for the park manager on Channel 4. I'd seen what lived in the abyss during the cleaning cycle. Every time I sent a rider down, I wondered if this would be the time something else came up. On Thursday afternoon, it happened. The line was still 50 people deep when I glanced at the water flowing into the slide. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't clear. It had a faint, grayish-black tinge, like ash mixed with oil, but there was something else. Small, dark shapes moving in the water. They looked like tadpoles, but they moved with too much purpose, too much intelligence. I hit the emergency stop. The klaxon blared, and I announced to the waiting crowd, "Sorry, folks, ride's temporarily closed for maintenance." Huh? I grabbed my radio and switched to Channel 4. "This is Operator 12 at the Abyss. I have a Rule 3 situation." Dale's voice came back immediately. "Copy 12. Do not look down the tube. Help is on the way." But I couldn't help myself. The urge to look into the slide's dark mouth was overwhelming. A horrifying curiosity that felt like it was being fed into my mind from somewhere else. I gripped the railing until my knuckles were white, fighting the compulsion. The dark shapes in the water were getting larger, and they were moving upward. Deal arrived with Abernathy and a maintenance crew. They carried heavy canvas bags and equipment I'd never seen before, long poles with barbed hooks, and what looked like a cattle prod that sparked with electricity. "Clear the tower," Abernathy commanded. "Pump malfunction. Give them all vouchers for free food." I herded the grumbling guests down the stairs. As they descended, I heard one of them, a teenage girl, say something that made my skin crawl. "Did you see those things in the water? They looked like baby." "Quiet," her mother snapped, but I could see the fear in her eyes. As soon as the civilians were gone, the real work began. I watched from the base of the tower as the maintenance crew lowered their equipment into the slide. There was a lot of shouting and the sound of something thrashing in the water. Then I heard Dale curse, followed by a wet tearing sound and a splash that echoed from deep inside the slide. One of the maintenance workers screamed. They hauled him up quickly, and I could see his arm was bleeding through his shirt, but it wasn't a clean cut. It looked like something had bitten him. "Get him to the medical station," Abernathy ordered. "Tell them it was equipment malfunction." They worked for another hour, pulling things out of the slide that I couldn't see clearly. The bags they carried away were heavy and dripping, and one of them was moving. As they passed me, I caught a glimpse of something pale and wet pressing against the canvas from the inside. "You did good, kid," Dale said when it was over. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "You followed the rule." "What were those things?" I asked. Dale was quiet for a long moment. "Offspring," he said finally. "The things in the deep reservoir. They breed. Most of the time, the filters catch them, but sometimes they get through. Sometimes they're strong enough to swim upstream." "What happens to them?" "They return to their parent," Dale said. "It's part of the arrangement. We don't kill them, and they don't escalate." "Their parent?" Dale looked at me with tired eyes. "You don't want to know about the parent. Trust me on that." But I did want to know. The compulsion was still there, gnawing at the back of my mind, and I realized with growing horror that it wasn't my curiosity at all. It was something else, something that had been planted in my mind when I looked at the water. That night, I dreamed of swimming through endless underground tunnels, following the sound of something massive moving through the water ahead of me. And when I woke up, my sheets were damp, with water that smelled like the deep reservoir. The incident at the abyss had shaken all of us, but Chloe was taking it the worst. She'd grown quiet and jumpy, constantly checking over her shoulder. She'd started carrying a small mirror, claiming she needed to touch up her makeup, but I'd seen her using it to look behind her when she thought no one was watching. "I keep feeling like something's following me," she confided to me during our lunch break. "Not just at work. At home, too. I hear things moving around my apartment at night." I wanted to tell her about the night shift, about the things I'd seen in the control room, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she was looking at me, like she was hoping I'd tell her it was all in her head. "Maybe you should talk to Dale," I suggested. "Dale's crazy," she said quickly. "They're all crazy. This is just a summer job, right? It's not real." But I could see in her eyes that she was starting to believe it was real, and that scared her more than anything. The next day, I was assigned to lost and found duty. It was usually a boring job, logging items that guests had left behind, storing them in the warehouse, waiting for people to claim them. But lost and found at Solstice Shores had its own rules. Rule 10. Any items left unclaimed for more than 30 days are to be incinerated. Do not take any of the items for yourself. They do not belong to the guests you think they do. Rule 19. If you find an item that seems to be moving on its own or feels unusually warm or cold, do not touch it directly. Use tongs and place it in the special containment bin immediately. The lost and found warehouse was in the basement of the main building. It was a cramped, humid space filled with metal shelving units and cardboard boxes. Dale was supervising, which meant something important was happening. "Big clean-out today," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "Anything that's been here longer than a month goes to the incinerator." The bin was full of the usual stuff: towels, sunglasses, water bottles, flip-flops. But there were other things, too. A child stuffed animal that looked like it was staring at me. A pair of swimming goggles that were fogged up on the inside even though they were dry. And jewelry, lots of jewelry. "Why so much jewelry?" I asked. "People lose things in the water," Dale said. "Sometimes they come back for them. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can't." Chloe was helping me bag up items for the incinerator. She was quiet, focused on her work, until she held up a silver necklace with a small mermaid charm. It was beautiful, the kind of piece that would have cost several $100s. "Wow," she breathed, turning it over in her hands. "This is real silver. And look at the detail on the mermaid." "It goes in the bag," Dale said without looking up from his clipboard. But I saw Chloe's face. She was staring at the necklace like it was hypnotizing her. Her pupils were dilated, and her breathing had become shallow. "Chloe," I said, "the necklace." She blinked, seeming to come back to herself, but I saw her hand move slightly, sliding the necklace toward her pocket. "Chloe?" "No," I whispered. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, desperate, almost hungry. "It's just sitting here," she said. "It's beautiful. Someone should appreciate it." "You heard Dale. It goes in the bag." "Dale doesn't know everything," she said, but her voice was uncertain. I reached for the necklace, but she pulled it away. "It's not hurting anyone. It's just going to be destroyed anyway." "Chloe, please, remember the rules." She stared at the necklace for a long moment. The mermaid charm seemed to glitter in the fluorescent light, and I could have sworn I saw its tiny eyes blink. "You're right," she said finally. But as she reached to put it in the bag, I saw her make a quick, subtle movement. The necklace disappeared into her pocket so fast I almost missed it. Dale finished his count and left with the first load. As soon as he was gone, I grabbed Chloe's arm. "Are you insane? Give it back." "Give what back?" she said, but her hand was pressed against her pocket. "The necklace. You know what the rules say." "The rules are bullshit," she said, but her voice was shaking. "It's just a necklace. It's not like it's going to come alive and strangle me." I stared at her. You don't actually believe that. She was quiet for a moment, then, very quietly, I want to believe it. I need to believe it. Because if the rules are real, then everything else is real too, and I can't handle that. She pulled the necklace out of her pocket. In the harsh fluorescent light it looked different. The silver was tarnished, and the mermaid's face was cruel, its mouth open in what might have been a scream. I just wanted something beautiful, she whispered, something that was mine. It's not yours, Chloe. It belonged to someone else, someone who's probably dead. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. How do you know that? Because, I said. Why else would it be in Lost and Found for more than a month? Why else would Dale be so insistent that it all gets destroyed? She stared at the necklace. The mermaid's eyes seemed to be looking back at her. Put it back, I said, please. She nodded slowly, then fastened it around her neck. I can't, she said. It feels right, like it belongs with me. The air in the warehouse seemed to grow colder, and from somewhere in the building I heard the sound of water dripping, even though all the pipes were supposed to be dry. Chloe, I said, you need to take that off, now. But she was already walking away, her hand pressed against the necklace, and as she disappeared up the stairs, I could have sworn I heard something else, a sound like singing, but underwater, muffled and distorted. The change in Chloe was immediate and terrifying. Over the next 2 days, she grew pale and distant. She complained constantly of being cold, even in the blazing Florida heat. Her skin took on a translucent quality, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. But worse than her physical changes was the way she acted around water. She would stand at the edge of pools, staring into the depths like she was listening to something only she could hear. When she thought no one was looking, she would dip her fingers in and bring them to her lips, tasting the chlorinated water with an expression of longing. She's getting worse, Sam told me during our break. Yesterday I saw her at the wave pool during her lunch break. She was sitting on the edge with her feet in the water, and she was humming this weird underwater sound. I'd noticed it too. The humming was constant now, a low, melodic sound that seemed to come from her throat without her even realizing it. It was hauntingly beautiful, but it made my skin crawl. On Friday, she was assigned to the Kraken's Mall, the wave pool. It was the park's most popular attraction, a massive artificial beach with waves that could reach 6 feet high. The pool had its own rules, and they were strict. Rule 4. The wave pool operates on a 20-minute cycle, 15 minutes of waves, 5 minutes of calm. If the waves deviate from this pattern or form a central, focused pool, initiate an immediate evacuation. Rule 13. If you see something large moving beneath the surface during the calm period, do not investigate. Clear the pool immediately and call for the night manager. I was stationed at the slide tower next to the wave pool, which gave me a perfect view of Chloe's lifeguard station. She was supposed to be scanning the water, watching for swimmers in distress, but instead, she was staring at the pool with an expression of desperate hunger. Around 3 p.m. I noticed something was wrong. It was supposed to be the calm cycle, but the water was still moving. Not waves exactly, but slow, deliberate ripples all moving inward toward the deep end. A central, focused pull. I grabbed my radio. Kraken's Mall, this is Tower 3. You've got a pattern deviation. No response. I looked over at Chloe's station. She was still in her chair, but she wasn't scanning the pool. Her head was tilted like she was listening to something. Her whistle hung silent around her neck. My blood turned to ice. A silent whistle. Rule 11. 2 rules being broken at once. I switched to the emergency channel. Manager, code 11 and a code 4 at the Kraken's Maw. Abernathy's voice came back immediately, tight with panic. Evacuate the pool, now! I slammed the emergency alarm and grabbed my bullhorn. Everyone out of the water! Evacuate immediately! The other guards started blowing their whistles and herding people toward the exits, but Chloe didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the water with that same hungry expression. And then I saw it. Just below the surface, something large and pale was moving. It was hard to make out clearly through the rippling water, but it looked like it was coiling and uncoiling, like a massive serpent. But it had too many appendages, and they moved in ways that hurt to watch. As the last guest scrambled out, Chloe finally stood up, but instead of helping with the evacuation, she took a step toward the pool's edge. The silver necklace gleamed at her throat, and I could see that her lips were moving, mouthing words I couldn't hear. "Chloe, don't!" I screamed. She turned to look at me, and I saw that her eyes had changed. They were still her eyes, but there was something else behind them, something ancient and hungry that was using her face like a mask. She smiled, and her teeth looked sharper than they should have been. "It's calling to me," she said, her voice carrying impossibly well across the distance. "It's been calling to me ever since I put on the necklace. It says I belong with it. In the deep places, in the dark." She took another step toward the edge. The thing in the water moved closer to the surface, and I could see it more clearly now. It was massive, easily the size of a small whale, but it had the general shape of a person that had been stretched and twisted and given too many arms and legs. Its skin was pale and mottled, like something that had been underwater for a very long time. And its face was almost human. Almost. The features were wrong, the proportions distorted, but there was intelligence in its eyes. Intelligence and hunger, and something that might have been love. "Chloe?" Dale's voice cut through the air as he sprinted toward the pool. "Stop!" But she was already at the edge, her toes curled over the concrete. The necklace was glowing now, pulsing with a soft, blue-green light that seemed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. "I can hear her," Chloe whispered. "She's so lonely. She's been alone for so long. And she's so beautiful." The thing in the water rose higher, breaking the surface. Water cascaded from its elongated form, and I could see that what I'd thought were extra limbs were actually thick, rope-like appendages that writhed and twisted independently, and covering its torso were small, circular wounds that pulsed with their own light. "She's been waiting for me," Chloe continued. "The necklace belonged to her first lover. She's been calling to anyone who would wear it, anyone who would listen. She needs someone to come home to her." Dale reached the pool's edge just as Chloe stepped forward. He lunged for her, managing to grab her arm just as she began to fall. But the necklace was doing something to her. She was stronger than she should have been, and her skin was slippery, like it was covered in a thin layer of moisture. "Let me go," she screamed, fighting against his grip. "She needs me. She loves me." The thing in the water let out a sound that I felt in my bones, a deep, resonant call that was part whale's song, part human scream. The pool began to churn, and geysers of water erupted around its massive form. Dale was losing his grip. Chloe was changing even as he held her skin becoming more translucent, her movements more fluid. And the necklace was burning brighter, the mermaid charm now clearly visible as a tiny, perfect replica of the thing in the water. "Help me!" Dale shouted. I jumped down from the tower and ran to the pool. Together, we managed to drag Chloe back from the edge, but she was fighting us with inhuman strength. Her fingernails had grown long and sharp, and they raked across Dale's arms, leaving deep gouges. "The necklace!" Dale gasped. "Get the necklace!" I reached for it, but the moment my fingers touched the silver chain, pain shot through my arm like electricity. The metal was burning hot, and I could feel it trying to burrow into my skin. "Use this." Dale threw me a pair of insulated gloves from his maintenance kit. I pulled them on and grabbed the necklace again. This time I managed to get a grip on it, but as I pulled, Chloe let out a scream that was more animal than human. The sound echoed across the water, and the thing in the pool answered with its own cry. The necklace came free with a wet, tearing sound like it was ripping away part of her skin. The moment it was gone, Chloe collapsed, her body going limp in Dale's arms. I held the necklace up, and for a moment I could see what it really was. The silver was actually some kind of organic material, probably bone or shell. The mermaid charm was carved from what looked like a tooth, and its eyes were tiny pearls that pulsed with their own light. The thing in the pool was sinking back beneath the surface, but its eyes remained fixed on the necklace. And as it disappeared into the depths, I heard it whisper something, in a voice like rushing water. Soon. I threw the necklace as far as I could, out into the deep end of the pool. It hit the water with a splash and sank immediately. The moment it disappeared, the pool began to calm, the waves settling back into their normal pattern. Chloe was unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Her skin was returning to normal, but there were marks on her throat where the necklace had been. Red, raw lines that looked like they'd been burned there. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. Dale was checking her pulse, his face grim. "I don't know. She was connected to it for too long. It got its hooks in deep." He looked up at me. "We need to get her to the medical station, and we need to do it now." As we carried her away from the pool, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced back at the water, and for just a moment, I saw something pale and massive moving in the depths, and carved into the concrete at the pool's edge where Chloe had been standing were symbols I'd seen before. The same primitive markings that had been on the walls of the abyss. The official story was heat exhaustion, but I knew the truth. Chloe had been claimed by something ancient and hungry, and we'd barely managed to save her. The question was, for how long? Chloe was in the hospital for 3 days. When she came back, she was different. Not like before. She was herself again, mostly. But there was something in her eyes, a haunted quality that reminded me of Dale. She'd seen something, in those moments of connection, something that had changed her forever. "I need to tell you something," she said to me and Sam during our lunch break. "About what I saw. About what this place really is." We were sitting in the employee cafeteria, but she kept her voice low, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "When I was wearing the necklace, I could understand things, see things, the history of this place." She shuddered. "It's not just a water park. It's a prison, a feeding ground. And we're the wardens." "What do you mean?" Sam asked. "The land this place is built on used to be a swamp, but not just any swamp. It was a sacred place, a place where the local tribes would make offerings to the water spirits. They knew what lived in the deep places, and they kept it happy with gifts and sacrifices." She paused, rubbing the marks on her throat. They were healing, but slowly, and they left faint scars that looked like gills. Then white settlers came and drained the swamp. They didn't understand what they were doing. They thought they were just clearing land for farming, but they were destroying something ancient, something that had been there since before humans walked the earth. "The thing in the pool," I said. "She's not the only one. There are others, different types, different personalities. They were forced underground when the swamp was drained, into caves and sinkholes and deep reservoirs. They've been waiting there ever since, getting hungrier and angrier." Chloe's eyes were distant, lost in memories that weren't quite her own. Aranathi's grandfather was the one who figured out how to make a deal with them. He was going to build a housing development on the land, but the things underneath kept killing his workers. So he made a bargain. He'd give them what they wanted, a steady stream of visitors, a place where they could occasionally feed, and in return, they'd stay hidden. They'd stay quiet. "The water park," Sam breathed. "The perfect cover. People come here to get in the water, to swim and play and let their guard down. The things below get to taste them, to touch them, to sample them. Most people never even know it's happening. They just feel a little tired after their visit, maybe a little drained." "But some people disappear," I said, thinking of the missing person reports I'd seen in the local news. "They don't. The particularly sensitive ones. The ones who taste right. They get taken down to the deep places, to the old caverns under the park. They become part of the system, part of the food chain." She looked at both of us with haunted eyes. "That's what would have happened to me if you hadn't stopped it. I would have been dragged down to the deep places, and I would have lived there, in the dark, feeding the things that live in the water. For decades, maybe forever. How do you know all this? Sam asked. Because I was connected to her, the thing in the pool. Her name is Nerida, and she's been down there for over a century. She showed me the others, the things that live in the different parts of the park. The abyss has something that looks like a giant sea snake, but with human hands. The lazy river has a whole colony of smaller things that look like children, but they're older than the park itself. My stomach turned. The pale guests. Rule 8. They're not guests. They're the descendants of the original tribe, the ones who knew how to appease the water spirits. They never left. They just adapted. They live in the spaces between the world of the living and the world of the dead. They help maintain the balance. And the offerings, I said, the monthly offerings at the grotto. Food for the smallest ones, the baby spirits. They're not dangerous, but they need to be fed regularly or they'll get hungry and start looking for bigger meals. Chloe leaned forward, her voice urgent. The thing is, the system is breaking down. The things below are getting stronger, hungrier. They're not satisfied with just the occasional disappearance anymore. They want more. They want to come back to the surface, to reclaim what was theirs. What can we do? Sam asked. I don't know, but I know we can't quit. We can't just walk away and pretend this isn't happening. Because if we do, if the park doesn't have enough wardens to maintain the balance, she shuddered, they'll find other ways to feed. They'll spread out beyond the park boundaries. They'll find their way into the water supply, into the beaches, into every pool and fountain and water feature in the city. The three of us sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what she'd told us settling over us like a heavy blanket. There's something else, Chloe said finally. The midnight event, the Labor Day party, it's not just a publicity stunt. It's a feeding event. They're planning to open the barriers, to let the things below come up and hunt freely for one night. Why? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Because they're hungry. Because the regular feeding isn't enough anymore. And because, she looked at us with eyes full of terror. Because they're planning to expand, to build more water parks, to create a whole network of feeding grounds. We have to stop it, Sam said. Chloe asked. We're just summer employees. We don't have any power here. But as she spoke, I was thinking about the night shift, about the control room and the cleaning cycles and the deep reservoir, about the systems that kept the things below contained and fed. Maybe we do, I said slowly. Maybe we have more power than we think. The days leading up to the Labor Day midnight splash were filled with an undercurrent of tension that seemed to affect everyone in the park. The permanent staff moved with a sense of urgency that bordered on panic, while the seasonal employees like us were kept busy with extra training sessions and equipment checks. Dale pulled me aside on the Thursday before the event. You're scheduled for the night shift during the party, he said. You and Kevin will be running the special protocols. With special protocols? His face was grim. The ones that keep everyone alive. The containment systems will be operating at minimal capacity during the event. We're walking a tightrope, and if anything goes wrong... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I'd seen what happened when the containment systems failed. That evening, I met with Chloe and Sam in the parking lot after our shifts. We'd been planning for this moment for days, ever since Chloe's revelation about the true nature of the park. I've been doing research, Sam said, pulling out his laptop, looking into the history of this place, the missing persons reports, the construction records. It's worse than we thought. He showed us a series of documents he'd found in the county archives, construction reports from the 1960s, unusual geological formations, and unexpected groundwater issues. Several workers had been injured or killed during construction, always in accidents involving water or underground excavation. Look at this, he said, pointing to a newspaper clipping from 1967. 3 workers disappeared during the installation of the deep reservoir system. Their bodies were never found. The article was brief, but it mentioned that the workers had been installing pumps in a previously unknown underground cavern system of unusual size and complexity. "That's where they live," Chloe said quietly. "In the caverns. The deep reservoir isn't just a water source, it's an access point, a way for them to move between the underground network and the park. Which means," I said, "if we can disrupt the deep reservoir system during the event, we might be able to trap them underground. Or we might flood the entire park and kill everyone," Sam pointed out. "Not if we do it right," I said. "The cleaning cycles are designed to drain and refill the entire system. If we can trigger a full system flush during the event, when the barriers are down, we might be able to wash them back into the deep caverns and then seal the access points." Chloe looked skeptical. "How do we seal underground caverns?" "We don't, but we can collapse the connecting tunnels. The park has emergency protocols for sealing breaches in the underground system. I've seen them in the control room. Explosive charges placed at strategic points in the tunnel network." "You're talking about blowing up part of the park," Sam said. "I'm talking about blowing up the parts that shouldn't exist," I corrected. "The unnatural expansions, the tunnels that were carved by things that live in the water. We let them keep their deep caverns, but we cut off their access to the surface. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one we had. And as we sat there in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the water park, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched." The night of the midnight splash arrived with a sense of impending doom that seemed to hang over the park like a storm cloud. The regular crowd was larger than usual, drawn by the novelty of an aftermath event, but there was something different about them too. They seemed more excited, more energetic, like they were responding to some subliminal signal. As I made my way to the control room, I passed groups of guests who were already in the water despite the early hour. They were laughing and splashing, but there was something manic about their behavior, and their eyes. Their eyes had a glassy, unfocused quality that reminded me of the pale guest from Rule 8. Kevin was already in the control room when I arrived, but he looked different. His skin was even paler than usual, and his movements were too fluid, too graceful. When he turned to look at me, I saw that his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "You're late," he said, his voice carrying an odd, echoing quality. "Traffic," I lied, my hand moving instinctively to the small pouch of salt in my pocket. The control room was different too. Additional monitors had been installed, showing views of parts of the park I'd never seen before. Underground chambers filled with dark water, tunnels that stretched away into blackness. And in one of the chambers, something massive and pale was moving. "Tonight's the night," Kevin said, his voice filled with an excitement that made my skin crawl. "The barriers come down at midnight. The deep ones rise. The feast begins." I realized with growing horror that Kevin wasn't Kevin anymore. He was something else, something that had been wearing Kevin's face and doing Kevin's job while it waited for this moment. "What happened to the real Kevin?" I asked. "He's still here," the thing said, tapping its chest, "deep inside, watching, screaming. He'll be screaming for a very long time." I backed toward the door, but it was already too late. The thing that had been Kevin moved faster than anything human should be able to move, blocking my escape route. "You're going to help us," it said. "You're going to run the protocols just like you've been trained, and when the barriers come down, you're going to welcome our family back to the surface." "No," I said, pulling out the salt. "I won't." The thing laughed, a sound like water gurgling down a drain. "Salt won't stop me, little warden. I've been feeding on the blessed waters for months. I've built up a tolerance." But I wasn't throwing the salt at it. I was throwing it at the control panel. The salt hit the electronics with a shower of sparks. Alarms began blaring and half the monitors went dark. The thing that had been Kevin screamed, a sound that was part human and part something else entirely. "You don't understand," it shrieked. The protocols must be followed. The barriers must come down. It's the only way to maintain the balance. But I was already at the backup control station, my fingers flying over the switches. I'd memorized the emergency procedures, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. System override, I said, entering the code Dale had taught me. Full system purge in 3, 2, 1. The deep reservoir pumps roared to life, but instead of their normal operation, they began pumping in reverse. Instead of drawing water up from the deep caverns, they were forcing it back down. The entire underground network was being flooded with blessed water, consecrated water, water that had been treated with salt and silver and other things that the creatures below couldn't tolerate. The thing that had been Kevin was writhing on the floor, its skin bubbling and smoking where my salt had touched it. As I watched, it began to change, its human features melting away to reveal something pale and wet and utterly alien. "You've killed us all," it gasped. "The balance is broken. They'll rise anyway, but now they'll be angry. Now they'll be hungry." Through the remaining monitors, I could see the effects of the system purge. The underground chambers were filling with treated water, and the creatures inside were fleeing deeper into the cavern system. But some of them were fighting back, swimming upward against the current, trying to reach the surface before the barriers came back up. In the wave pool, Narada was thrashing in the churning water, her massive form breaking the surface as she fought against the purge. Guests were screaming and running, but some of them were standing at the pool's edge, staring at her with those same glassy eyes. "The chosen ones," the thing on the floor whispered. "The ones who've been prepared. They'll still answer the call. They'll still come home to us." I hit the emergency evacuation alarm, hoping it would snap the entranced guests out of their trance. But even as I did, I knew it was too late. The midnight hour had arrived, and all across the park, things were beginning to rise from the depths. The park had become a battlefield. Through the control room's monitors, I could see chaos erupting across every attraction. The abyss was spewing dark water filled with writhing shapes. The lazy river was flowing backward, carrying pale figures that moved like humans, but weren't quite right. And in the wave pool, Narada was locked in combat with the reverse flow of the purge system. But the worst part was the guests. About a third of them were running in panic, screaming and fighting to reach the exits. But the others were walking calmly toward the water, their faces blank with bliss, their eyes reflecting the emergency lights like mirrors. "They've been prepared," the thing on the floor croaked. "Months of exposure to the treated water. Months of tiny doses of our essence. They're ours now, whether they know it or not." I grabbed the radio and switched to the emergency frequency. "This is Control. We have a code black across all attractions. Full evacuation protocol, now." Dale's voice came back, tight with panic. "I see it. We're trying to get people out, but some of them won't leave. They're fighting us." On the monitors, I could see him and other staff members trying to herd guests toward the exits, but the entranced ones were resisting, some of them violently. A woman in a floral swimsuit was clawing at a security guard who was trying to pull her away from the kiddie pool. A man in board shorts was standing waist deep in the lazy river, his arms outstretched, as if he was waiting for an embrace. "The charges," I said into the radio. "Dale, we need to detonate the tunnel charges." "Are you insane? There are still people in the park. If we don't do it now, there won't be anyone left to save." I could see him on the monitors, standing near the main pool with a detonator in his hand. His face was torn between duty and horror. 30 seconds, he said finally. "Get everyone as far from the pools as possible." I grabbed the public address microphone. "Attention all guests and staff, this is an emergency. Move away from all water features immediately. I repeat, move away from all water features immediately." But even as I spoke, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The entranced guests were beyond hearing, beyond reason. They belonged to the things in the water now, and they would die with them if necessary. Through the monitors, I watched the final moments. In the wave pool, Narada had stopped fighting the purge system and was rising to the surface, her massive form breaking through the churning water. The guests who had been called to her were wading deeper. their faces radiant with joy, even as the dark water closed over their heads. In the abyss, something serpentine and massive was coiling up through the slide, its scales scraping against the fiberglass with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. And in the lazy river, the pale children were rising from the depths, their two large eyes reflecting the emergency lights as they reached for the guests who had answered their call. 10 seconds, Dale's voice crackled through the radio. I closed my eyes and covered my ears, but nothing could block out what came next. The explosions were muffled by the water, but they shook the entire park. The ground bucked and heaved, and several of the monitors went dark. Through the ones that remained, I could see geysers of water shooting up from cracks in the concrete. And then, silence. The pools were draining. The creatures were being sucked back down into the deep places, carried by the rush of water into the collapsed tunnels. Some of them fought against the current, but the treated water was weakening them, and the pool was too strong. Narrations was the last to go. Even as she was dragged down into the depths, she reached one massive arm toward the surface, her fingers stretching toward the guests who had been called to her. For a moment, her head broke the surface one last time, and I could see her face clearly. She was beautiful in a terrible alien way. Her features were almost human, but elongated and refined, like a classical statue that had been left underwater for centuries. Her eyes were the deep blue-green of ocean depths, and they held an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly inhuman. She looked directly at the camera, and I swear she looked directly at me. Her lips moved, and even though there was no sound, I could read the words. "This is not over." Then she was gone, pulled down into the dark water that rushed through the broken concrete into the collapsed tunnels below. The park was quiet now, except for the sound of rushing water and distant sirens. On the monitors, I could see the aftermath. The pools were empty, their bottoms cracked and broken. The slides were twisted and damaged, and scattered across the concrete were the guests who had been called to the water, lying motionless where the current had deposited them. Some of them were moving, coughing up dark water and looking around in confusion, but others— "How many?" I asked into the radio. Dale's voice was hollow. 17 confirmed dead, maybe more. The ones who went all the way down into the deep water, they didn't come back up. I stared at the monitors, at the empty pools and the broken concrete and the scattered bodies. We had stopped them, but at what cost? "It's over," I said. "No," Dale replied. "It's not. This was just one feeding ground. There are others, and now that this one is gone, they'll be hungrier than ever." The official story was a catastrophic equipment failure. A malfunction in the underground pumping system had caused multiple explosions, resulting in 17 deaths and dozens of injuries. The park was closed permanently, and the land was sold to a development company. But I knew the truth, and so did the few other survivors who had seen what really happened that night. Huh? I never went back to Solstice Shores. I got in my car the next morning and drove until I ran out of gas, then kept driving. Sam called me a few times in the following weeks, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about what we'd been through. The last I heard, he'd taken a job as a night security guard at a shopping mall. Something about wanting to work somewhere with no water. Chloe disappeared entirely. Her apartment was empty, her phone disconnected. Some people said she'd moved back in with her parents in another state. Others said she'd been seen walking along the beach at night, staring out at the ocean, like she was waiting for something. But I knew where she really was. I'd seen her in my dreams, standing in the ruins of the park, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes reflecting the moonlight like water. She was waiting for Narrations to find a way back to the surface. She was waiting to go home. The development company that bought the land tried to build a shopping center on it, but they ran into problems. The construction crews kept reporting strange incidents, tools that disappeared overnight, workers who claimed to hear voices coming from the drainage pipes, equipment that malfunctioned when it came into contact with groundwater. Eventually, they gave up and sold the land to the city, which turned it into a nature preserve. The official reason was environmental protection, but I knew better. The city knew what was down there, and they were making sure it stayed buried. Sometimes, late at night when it's raining, I can still hear that wet scraping sound. Nerada's voice, whispering, the sound of something ancient and hungry clawing its way back to the surface. I don't go swimming anymore. I don't even take baths. And I always carry a small pouch of salt because you never know what's lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the barriers to come down again. The water remembers, and so do the things that live in it. They're still down there, in the deep places, waiting for their next chance to rise. And when they do, they'll be hungrier than ever. Because the balance is broken now. The ancient agreements are void. And the things that live in the water have nothing left to lose. So if you ever find yourself at a water park, especially an old one, pay attention to the rules. All of them, even the ones that don't make sense. Because some rules aren't meant to keep you safe. They're meant to keep other things contained. And when those rules are broken, when the barriers come down, when the deep ones rise, well, let's just hope you're not in the water when it happens.